working. Okay, that seems to be working now. Very good. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming to this Community Woodlands Association webinar on empowering the next generation of community woodland leaders. I'm Jo Rodgers, and I've been the Development Officer at CWA for the past 3 years. I've also served on the board of my local community woodland, and I was a director of Glengarry Community Woodlands from 2017 until 2022. And I stood down at the AGM last autumn after a year as chair. So many of you will already know me from the CWA annual conferences or from the emails I send out regularly to members, such as our monthly e-bulletins. And I'm delighted that there are also plenty of folk here today who are not currently involved with their local community woodland, but are interested in learning more about the movement. So you're very welcome to this CWA webinar, and please feel free to join in the Q&A and discussion at the end of the event. We'd really love to hear from you. The idea for this event first occurred to me during our annual conference in October last year, where we brought together a wide range of community woodland groups from across Scotland. I noticed that there were only a handful of younger people there, and it made me wonder why young people are so underrepresented in the community woodlands movement. Among my peers, people in their 20s and 30s, I know so many folk who are eager to contribute to their communities, who want to help tackle the climate and biodiversity crises, and who recognise the potential ways in which community land ownership can strengthen local democracy and contribute to tackling issues around social justice. And I know from my own personal experience that community woodlands can be an enjoyable and rewarding route to deliver on all of these areas and more. Community woodlands are incredibly valuable assets for local people. But why aren't more younger people involved, I wondered. And I have heard it said that younger folk simply aren't interested, or that they are too busy with their jobs. But I'm not convinced that this is the full story. So this event is intended to be a starting point for exploring the perspectives and experiences of younger folk who are involved with community woods, and hearing their ideas about how we can make community woodlands more accessible to younger people, and perhaps to other underrepresented groups as well. I know that many of the CWA members are mindful of succession planning, and it's wonderful to see so many folk from established community woodland groups here this evening. I hope you'll all share your experiences and ideas about this topic during the discussion too. But first, we have 4 speakers today: Liam, Amy, Samuel, and Fritha. And each of them is at a different stage in their engagement with community woodlands, with some having been involved for a relatively long time and others for only a few years. Each has taken a different route and has a different role to play in their local community woodland, and they're based all over Scotland. We're going to hear from each of them in turn, and then we'll open up to the Q&A and invite attendees to participate in the discussion. So before I introduce our first speaker, could I ask you to stay muted and to post in the chat if you have a question or comment, and we'll come back to those at the end. It would be really helpful if you could indicate whether you would like to ask your question yourself, or if you'd prefer for me to read it out to the speakers during the second part of the event. And as I mentioned, our director, Andy Rockall, is here this evening, and he'll be keeping an eye on the chat for any technical issues that might come up. So if you do have a problem, just message Andy directly. So on to our first speaker. Liam McLoone is the chair of the board of Arkaig Community Forest, and to the best of our knowledge is the youngest chair of a community woodland in Scotland. We're happy to be corrected on that. Liam runs his own business, Brock Contracting, which specialises in the restoration of Caledonian pine woods. With a passion for the natural world, Liam has spent the last 8 years working to restore ancient woodlands of Lochaber. In his volunteer role on the board of Arkaig Community Forest, he is passionate about connecting people with the woods and land. So Liam, it's over to you.
Thanks, Jo. Thanks for the intro. So yes, I'm Liam. I'm the chair of Arkaig Community Forest. And I live here as a resident at Arkaig. I've been involved with the group now for, well, it'll be 8 years this autumn. Doesn't feel like 8 years, it's passed pretty quickly, but I also feel like I've been here forever. I got involved back in 2015. I was 19, The project at Arkaig was just starting up then, and that was to purchase our community woodland. And yeah, it was a very conceptual stage back then, and the group was just finding its feet, so it was really interesting to join. And being 19, I didn't really know what I was doing, or maybe why I was there. It just seemed like a really good thing to be a part of. And now, all these years on, I'm very glad that, yep, I was there at the right time and have stuck with it. I would say I originally got involved with an interest in timber. I studied furniture making at college, and yeah, I was thinking, oh, this would be great, a native woodland, all these native timbers that I can work with. But quite quickly got to understand how limited that is as a resource, and how depleted and the sort of desperate stage that our forests are in. And so gradually through time, I really got the bug for ecology, and really took an interest in the plants and the wild things out in the forest. And so that's what I moved into more, and I'll come on to that in a second. So yeah, I started as a volunteer, both as a member of the community group and then quite quickly onto the board. But at the same time, I started volunteering out in the woods doing practical work with contractors. I was quite fortunate that it was quite a short period, like maybe 4 or 5 days of volunteering before I ended up on a contract myself, which I think is quite rare for most people getting into ecology or conservation as a sector. I feel like most people I know have to put in a lot more volunteering to get the experience before they get a role. So I was very fortunate in that sense. And I think part of the reason for that is there is such a lack of young people and people who work practically in the area. So yeah, quite quickly became self-employed and taking on contract work in the forest. And then over time, I would say I was sort of 4 years self-employed, and then over time I started my own business, brought contracting. And that was really just the progression from doing sort of small-scale contracts, working with other contractors, to then the work increasing and having to take on larger contracts and employees, kind of to meet the forest needs and what contracts were available. So that's where I am now. The business still focuses on the restoration of ancient woodland, specifically Caledonian pine forest at the moment. And I've just purchased a mobile sawmill, so starting to get more into that woodworking side. But the kind of roundabout thing is that I won't be so much working with native timbers, it will be doing something with all those non-natives that we're taking out the forest. So across that journey of employment, I was also volunteering on the board of Arkaig Community Forest, and I've had the various roles throughout the years. I think I've ticked off the main three. I was treasurer at one point, I was secretary, and now I'm chair. And that was as valuable as the experiences working in the woods, is that experience of governance and running an organization, and just the experience of doing those roles I've found to be extremely valuable, as much to running the organization now as it is to my career. So yeah, some of the benefits I have out of my community woodland and working in the woods, I would say in the last 8 years, I've never been short of fulfillment or having a purpose. I've never sort of found myself questioning, well, what am I doing here? This doesn't really make sense. It's a very, to me, restoring the forest and working in the forest, it's a very clear purpose, and I'm very grateful for that. It's it's very, very rewarding. And that connection that I've built with the woods, first of all, coming at it with that kind of mindset of, oh, I want this resource from it, to then learning about the woods, respecting the woods, and coming to want to shape my business around the needs of the woods, has been a really rewarding process. So I just want to touch on my sort of thoughts on routes into the sector for young people, because I think this is really difficult. So I'll start with some opportunities and then go through some barriers. I would say the sort of opportunities now are around, the ecological restoration movement. I really think there is a lot more work in this field, and it's forever growing. Another thing I would say there are a lot of opportunities in is ecotourism. I would say there's a hugely untapped resource there. And land-based crafts, that's something I'm looking to move more towards, is making use, as I say, shaping businesses around what the forest needs. So making use of what's available. And yeah, NGOs and community enterprises, there's many people working now for community groups. Community groups are getting to a really exciting stage with more staff and growing year by year. And NGOs are now bigger and more present than ever. So there's lots of good jobs out there for the various NGOs. But that's all very well mentioning the sort of buzzwords, ecotourism, ecological restoration, but how do you actually get into it, and what are the sort of barriers? Because whilst there may be work opportunities there, a lot of community woodlands like ours are in rural areas. And I think I'll start with the big one, which is housing. And I know that's an issue across the board for young people, whether you're rural or in an urban setting. Though, yeah, housing is our main constraint here. And that's something that, yeah, we really need to get on top of if we want to welcome young people into the area. Another part of it is there's not always structure. So like my journey in has been self-employed. I had to really develop my skill sets and sort of be quite flexible to meet the work. So there's not always a job to walk straight into, and being flexible and open-minded has been quite an important part of that. And also just being willing not to earn all the time. Some, you know, when you're starting out as self-employed as a young person, the work can peak and flow, and you've got to find a way to make that work. And yeah, so yeah, I would say another barrier to it is that rural and secluded part to it is quite a difficulty. It's not always the most social, being the only young person in a glen. And we were talking about this earlier, the sort of young person bracket here, I would say, is from teens, 20s into 30s, because that's who we're lacking at Arkaig. So that's a barrier too, not having that age group here. So yes, I will wrap up before I start rambling on, but I think it's really important. Yeah, so as a community chair, what I'm doing to try and improve our capacity to welcome young people into the Glen, we're starting with housing. We're looking to follow in Glengarry's footsteps and set up community crofts. So we're now underway with another community asset transfer request to Forest and Land Scotland to get more land to have some community crofts. We're trying to set up sustainable businesses. We've got a tree nursery, a larder. We're really keen to get on with that ecotourism and connecting people with the woods. So yes, I would say the two biggest ones are secure jobs and housing, and those are the two things we're focused on working at just now. But yes, I will hand it back to Jo. Thanks very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Liam. That's so interesting. I've made lots of notes that we can circle back to at the end. But before then, we're going to hear from Amy, who is the manager of the Community Woods and Garden at Polbeth and West Calder. And this site is a small woodland in the Central Belt. So we're going from Lochaber to the Central Belt with growing space and a vibrant volunteer team. Amy also supports Easterbreek Community Woods, which was brought into community ownership last year. And in the past, Amy has held various ranger roles, including Community Outreach Ranger for the National Trust for Scotland. Making nature accessible to everyone has always been at the core of her roles. So it's over to you, Amy.
Thanks very much, Jo. Yes, we couldn't be more different to what Liam was talking about, and probably the majority of community woodlands. So I'm going to show you a little presentation that will first of all introduce our site, and then I'll talk about ways we engage with young people. So here we go. Can everyone see that? Yeah? Brilliant. Okay. Sorry, I should have worked out how to, there we go, move it on. So to give you an idea of our site, the red line here is the boundary of our site. It's kind of split in half, and we are in between two towns, West Calder, which is a fairly affluent town, and Polbeth on the other side, which has areas of deprivation. So we've got quite a mixed community around us. We're in West Lothian, and the A71 road you can see here is a main road with bus routes, and you'll notice that we have a train station in West Calder. So we're fairly well accessed for public transport, and in time we're going to become a green island surrounded by housing. So this field you can see, this field here has permission for houses to be built on it. So we're going to be a little green island in quite an urban area soon. We have good facilities, unlike most community woodlands. So you can see we have 2 polytunnels here for growing. We have a marquee where we have lots of community events. This is a building we call the Shed, which really undersells it. It has a kitchen, bathroom, underfloor heating, like it's a really nice resource. This little thing here is my office, and then we have 4 containers, most are storage, and 1 is our community workshop. We also have a massive car park, again, huge asset. Woodland itself, the majority of it's about 35 years old, so it's fairly young, and it's a nice mixed woodland. We have mostly silver birch, alder, and Scots pine. We also have really old beech trees on site. We've got lots of old avenues from old estates, and that really increases our biodiversity. So we're really lucky to have this area has been wooded for a very long time. A lot of what we do is growing. So we have a volunteer team of about 30 to 40. I'd say it usually increases as the weather gets better and then decreases as the weather gets worse. So we do a lot of community growing. We grow flowers and veg for the wider community. We do a lot of food provision, reducing food poverty, and we like to reduce food miles by obviously growing local and keeping the food local. We supply local food banks and things like that, and we use our food to upskill our volunteers as well, so we teach them how to use that. We have a community workshop as one of our containers, and in that we have a lathe. You can see Craig here. This was our Easter open event. He's turning eggs and then showing people how he's doing it and then giving them away, and people are donating, and that was a real hit. We also really encourage repurposing materials. So you can see there's a bench here that's been made from whiskey staves. We've got a local cooperage who donated them. And again, we do upskilling in terms of teaching our volunteers how to do woodwork and mend things and repair things. We also engage a lot with our local schools, so education is a huge part of what we do. I feel like we work well with young people until they leave school, and then there's a big gap until they kind of come back to us later in life. So we want to kind of fill that gap. So yeah, we have 3 schools on our doorstep. The high school's just behind us, and we have 2 primary schools and lots of other kind of nurseries and things. So we're really lucky again in that regard. This is a team photo of our Friday morning group. This organisation, we're having our 10-year anniversary in June, but it was a grassroots organisation. It was started by 2 mums in the local community, and I was the first member of staff 3 years ago. I was supposed to work there 5 hours a week doing volunteer or coordinating. 3 years later, I manage it. I've got one more member of staff, Sarah, who you can see there. And we're both part-time, but we do the best we can and as much as we can with the resources we have. So I'm just going to completely contradict what I just said. So we do work really well with young people, and then we have a demographic of older people, but what we're missing in the middle is people who are going to take on a leadership role. So this is our volunteer. If you look at our age bracket of all our current volunteers at the moment, you can see from that it looks like we've got a wonderful representation of young people across all the ages, and that is true. But the demographic, I would quite like to explain to you. So we have our 2 major groups are retired people who engage with us and want to give back, are often on the board, really valuable, but they're not looking for a career. Do you know, the young people we tend to work with are often referred to us, so we do a lot of wellbeing support. So the people that come to us that tend to be younger often come to benefit themselves, improve their well-being. We have lots of organisations refer into our volunteer groups. So we have community psychiatric nurse teams, we have occupational therapists, lots of different support organisations within the community. And we also work within our organisation with a community link worker, and we have a two-way referral process there. So he refers people to me to join my volunteer teams, so to reduce isolation, to improve all different areas of well-being, to learn kind of life skills or social skills, and I can refer back to him for additional support. So it's a wonderful resource, but it does mean that the young people we work with are tending to get something out of it from themselves rather than for the organisation. So I spoke to our young volunteers and all of our volunteers really. I sat down and we used our tea breaks for a good old chat, and I asked them what they thought the barriers were, and this is the list that they came up with. So I'll just very quickly go through them. Lack of representation is a big one, a really big one, and I think that that's probably fair to most community woodlands. The way that we're trying to tackle this, so we've just had a business plan rewritten, and the way we're trying to tackle this is by having very targeted groups. So we will have like a 6-week sessions, maybe getting in qualified leaders or using our own staff team, and they'll be targeted at different groups that aren't represented. So maybe young people or LGBTQ+, or BME, refugees, we've worked refugees in the past, so really targeted groups. And the idea is that they do 6 weeks, and then they have opportunity to kind of filter into our regular volunteer teams, and then go from there once they're engaged in the site. It's just breaking down that first barrier where they think that's not for me. So targeted groups is where we're getting around that. Transport, even though I am in a rural setting and we have great transport links, it's still a huge barrier. People don't have cars, they can't afford transport, the buses in our area are terrible. So some of these are perceived. We can provide volunteer expenses to break that down. We don't shout about that because we couldn't do that for absolutely everyone, so we do it on a bit of an ad hoc basis. We encourage car sharing as well. But yeah, it's still a barrier. Even when you feel like you have it all, it is still a massive barrier. People think that if they lack relevant knowledge or skills, then they have nothing to contribute. I think we need to get better at shouting about you don't need to have experience. We can upskill you, just get involved. There's lots of opportunities within the volunteer role. So for people kind of my age, 30s, having kids, they just don't have the time. So we're making a real effort to have more family-friendly events in the holidays, and also provide weekend sessions. So time of session, all our sessions are during the week. So we're going to try and have at least once a month a weekend event or a workshop or something that people can engage with if that's the barrier to them. And also just a lack of awareness of what we do and where we are. So we're getting new signage put in, which will really help. But I think we were using posters, other community groups and Facebook. Young people don't engage with those. So we've now got an Instagram page, so fingers crossed that that makes a difference. So family-friendly events, here's a few examples. So we had a fungus walk, which was really popular and attracted young people. Here we have, this is a poplar moth, so we had a mothy coffee event where we offered everyone tea, coffee, and we emptied the moth traps early in the morning, and that was a huge success. Another way that we're looking to get people in, this is our next event happening at the Community Woods and Garden. So partnering with organisations who already have that young demographic, already have really engaged volunteers. So we're running this in partnership with Rise, who are based in Edinburgh City Centre. They work out of a stalled space and they grow different types of mushrooms and sell them to restaurants. It's fascinating. And when I went to one of their events, I felt like the oldest person there. So we're working with them in partnership to kind of draw in that audience, work with people who already engage with the people that we want to engage with. And another thing we're trying to do is work with popular topics. So people are mad about fungi at the moment, growing it or studying it. So we're taking advantage of that. Also, another way to get a different audience in is doing things that you wouldn't necessarily associate with a community woodland. So we did this event last summer in conjunction with the St Andrews University. This was an event on post-industrial landscapes. It was called Into the Bings, and it was a partnership exhibition with Ukrainian artists, and it was a fundraiser to support them as well. So we had a creative writing workshop inspired by the woods, and we had West Lothian Council come along and lots of stuff from the Shale Trail to engage a totally different audience. These were faces I'd never seen before, so that was a good way to get new people in. I'd say though the most important thing that we do to get different people in is work with partners. So I've mentioned a lot about having one-off events or weekend events to just get people over the door, but really the most engagement we've had with, the most meaningful engagement we've had with young people is when we've worked with partners who have done a long-term program and they've offered work skills, tangible work skills. So they get tickets, they get qualifications, they get to work on lots of different projects, so they get a taste for the sector and things that they could do. So we had one project with this one here, you can see, was partnered with TCV, and it was about upskilling people to work in the sector. It wasn't age defined, but a lot of people were on this programme. 3 of these volunteers still volunteer with us today. This was two years ago, and one of the volunteers actually applied for a role at the garden. So that worked. We've done it with other youth groups and things like that. So just to summarise, the way that we're tackling this lack of kind of leadership roles, we're improving our marketing strategies to reach the right people. We're providing training opportunities so people are actually benefit, they can see the benefit to their volunteering, working with open targeted events for families or the people we want to engage with, having closed sessions to really target underrepresented groups, and working with partnership organisations who are already engaging with the people that we want to attract. So thank you very much. If you want to follow us on social media, that would be very much appreciated. Keep up with what we do, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Amy. That was brilliant. I like a little plug for social media. As the person who does social media for CWA, that's the sort of thing I try to say at the end of a presentation too. That was so comprehensive, so much to think about. We're going to go straight on though to our next speaker, and we'll come back for questions at the end. And if we do run over kind of 5 past 10 past 7 for a bit of a discussion, our speakers are all happy to stay on for a little bit longer. So just to mention that. So our next speaker is Samuel Lindsay, who initially joined Bute Community Forest in a graduate position in 2021 after finishing his Masters in Ecology and Conservation at the University of Aberdeen. His role quickly expanded to include managing much of the 400-acre woodland owned by the community. And his job is diverse and has included writing woodland management plans, designing new infrastructure, and expanding the Community Forest Schools programme. As Bute Community Forest's ranger and ecologist, he contributes to almost all aspects of running the community forest. And today he's going to talk more about his work and experiences, touching on both the opportunities and challenges of working in a community woodland as a younger person. Over to you, Samuel.
Okay, hi everyone. My presentation is going to be a little bit different because rather than coming at it from a sort of management leadership side, I'm just more of the employee sort of boots on the ground sort of side of the community forest, and actually getting most importantly, a paid job with them, which is always adds to it, and it's always tricky, and I think especially for young people it is a challenge. So yeah, I work for Bute Community Forest. You can just see us there on the map. We are an island off the west coast of Scotland, still fairly accessible from Glasgow, and I think that definitely does help us with a lot of the tourism side because people can travel by train and boat down from Glasgow. Our woodlands, as Joe says, about 400 acres. You've got the green area you see there is Ballinkeely Oak Woodland. That is an ancient oak woodland, was originally a royal hunting woodland. It's also triple SI, so it's been great for sort of as a focus for a lot of our conservation and biodiversity side of what we do. The pink and sort of darker pink areas, they were plantation that was bought over as part of the community forest, and they are providing us with the opportunity to fell it, but more importantly replace it with a combination of native woodlands that are new to the area that we don't have elsewhere in the island, and also sort of working woodlands that we can look at actually using in the future as opposed to just having for conservation. And then finally, the yellow area down the bottom is mosswood. So that's where we have, that's a sort of birch alder woodland. That's where we have the majority of our community events because it's a bit more accessible for people. So there's Ballinkeely Oak Woodland. Very nice, very overrun with bracken, which is another massive problem. But yeah, my background, felt very vain making this, but I'm still quite early on in my career with it. So I graduated from Aberdeen University with a bachelor's degree in zoology and had absolutely no clue what I wanted to do with it at all. So and then COVID hit, so I stayed on to get a MSc in conservation and ecology. And at that point in time, I was still very much thinking about going forward with some sort of job in consultancy, which I was always unsure of. And then I came home and I was prepared to have some time off, and a job came up at Bute Community Forest. I was aware, sort of growing up on the west coast of Scotland, I was always aware of community forests. I went to them when I was in primary school, but from what I knew of local ones, there seemed to be a lot of politics to them and they seemed quite stressful. So I steered well clear of them because I didn't need that. But this opportunity came up for, the official title was Sustainable Rural Tourism Officer. And that was a position that was founded by the Highlands and Islands Enterprise, and they were specifically looking for a graduate, which is rare for a lot of these things. A lot of jobs, they expect you to have a lot of experience and a lot of volunteering experience before you ever actually get them. But this wasn't originally what I was sort of after. With my background, my focus was always more, and I really wanted to do the ecology and the conservation side of it. But I saw a lot of potential for this woodland. I was going to be their first full-time member of staff. And I saw a lot of ways other things I could bring to this job that other people possibly couldn't, or if they had just focused on the tourism side. So with that, within my first year as Sustainable Rural Tourism Officer, I made loads of maps for the forest, had them approved by the council and planning departments. I wrote our woodland management plan that would make us eligible for Scottish forestry funding, funding is another big thing, as you'll know, for community woodlands. You can't get enough of it, and you sort of rely on it for the most part. I also, which was in no way planned, I expanded our forest schools programme to now, on Isle of Bute, we have 3 primary schools, 1 secondary school and a nursery, which is quite a lot for the size of the place. So yeah, we had over 100 young people out. And it's definitely going back to what Amy and Liam, Amy said before, getting the primary school kids out in that, and sort of secondary school are a lot easier. It's this demographic after it that proves impossible to get, because places like most rural places, what happens is once people either go off to university or they have to go off to find a job, they don't really come back as much. And then as well, with my background and sort of enthusiasm for the plants and animals and the nature side of it, I started doing tours and leading events. We've had Wildflower Wander, Meet the Moths, or Fungi Foray, things like that, which have all been really successful and have got a mixed age range. So my current role, after my 1-year contract as Sustainable Rural Tourism Officer, I managed to get it. They wanted to present me with a new title, which was Woodland Ranger and Ecologist, which I was delighted with. No increase in pay or anything, but I had a better title that was relevant to what I wanted to do and the direction I wanted to take it. I'm not going to read them out to you, but you can see there's a long list of parts to the role. And I think I'll get onto that. That can be one of the challenges with working for community forests, and possibly not even just being a young person, just anyone working for community forests, because they tend to be quite small organizations. Really, this job could or should be done by multiple people to manage all the different aspects, from communications, event planning, general maintenance, report writing, but it comes down to myself and who's full-time and my part-time colleague. My experience being a young person in the sector. It's definitely when I started this role, I started it back in 2021, and I was 22 when I started the role. And I definitely found, and still to this day, that people do struggle to treat you the same way they would if you were another adult. I mean, I say another adult, even like that, I am an adult. It's that ingrained into you that you should view yourself differently. I definitely find it a lot. I found it with people I'd have to work with in other organisations, because as far as the forest goes, I'm probably our main contact for anything that's conservation or ecology based. But people would always still opt to talk to the board members and that before me, until they had to be referred to me. And then as well, dealing with the public, it's rural areas, people have been doing what they've been doing for a long time, and they don't always like the change, or especially with rural areas, they don't always like incomers. I mean, especially this being an island as well, it's very much you're viewed as a mainlander until, I'm not quite sure what the changing point is, but that was definitely part of it. As well, as Liam and that mentioned, the location, it does take a real nosedive to social life, and you need to sort of be prepared for that and be prepared for it to take a while to build up. It took almost a year here before I started making friends that were my own age. Up until that, my friends were generally the parents of the kids I was teaching, the sort of young families, but it's definitely a challenge to it. And I think that was possibly what was also quite off-putting for a lot of people coming for this job. But because I'd grown up, I grew up in the mainland quite close to here, so I was quite used to this sort of level of rural living. I was kind of, after 5 years in Aberdeen, was quite happy to come back to it. And as I also mentioned earlier, community politics, as I'm sure many of you know, community woodlands, they've got a fierce history to them. Almost all of them have some form of drama, and it can be quite daunting to sort of come into that as a new person. And to have to deal with that, it definitely takes out of you a bit. And then sort of the final point is, which I think I know a lot of my friends in similar sectors struggle with, there's a lot of imposter syndrome, because you end up having a lot of responsibility, and it can often feel just quite a lot, and you sort of start to doubt yourself, which is why networks like this are very important, because you can bounce things off other people your age, and also you sort of have these examples of other people your own age doing similar things. You're not just having to base it around you when you're in meetings with people that are all above 50 and have been doing this for like the past 30 years. But why is it worth it? Because there's a positive note to it. One thing I really like about working for community forests is that you can make a real difference to the communities and to the woodlands, and it's far more manageable. A lot of my friends that work for larger organisations like Nature Scott, I always see it as they're a very small cog in a very large machine, and ultimately what they do is still very good work, but they don't often get to actually see the immediate effects of it. And also they're not, I'm sure they're still very much valued by their company, but it's different when you're somewhere like here and people see you in the street and they can thank you, and you're far more connected to the people you're making a difference for. And the other thing which I've also advised a lot of people, ones I've talked to over the year and so, is there's a lot more, part of it being part of a smaller organization, there's a lot more freedom to sculpt the role into what you want it to be. I have no doubt I would have had to have been working away for at least 10 times the amount of time to try and get myself to an ecologist position through any other company. But through somewhere like this, I was able to show them what the value of having that was. And if you're willing to make some sacrifices for moving to a more rural area or having to deal with a lot more other things, it can be a really good way to fast track your career. And as well as that, there's a lot of opportunities that you might not get elsewhere because you're given a lot more responsibilities. I mean, from last year, from my first year of full-time employment, I'm able to say that I've got a woodland management plan that's been approved by Scottish Forestry, which it'll do wonders for your CV. And is that my time, Joe? Yeah, cool. I think that's it.
You can have a minute or two to wrap up. It's your 1 minute warning.
No, it's fine. And yeah, I'm happy to take any questions at the end about any of the stuff I do, any of the work that we do at Bute Community Forest. in many ways, we're quite lucky because we've got quite an established forest and quite a significant area, which is both exciting and daunting. But yeah, I hope that was helpful to some people.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to just hear, even in just the 3 speakers so far, the diversity of perspectives, the diversity of challenges. And what really strikes me as well is that some of the things that might seem challenging can also be opportunities. And it kind of depends on certain circumstances that you might be able to change, in terms of, like, as you mentioned, imposter syndrome, or having a very diverse job can be a bit of a challenge, but it can also be this amazing opportunity if you have the right support. So I look forward to potentially talking about that a little bit more at the end, but we have one more speaker before we get there. So our final speaker today is Fritha West, who is currently a postgraduate researcher at the University of St Andrews. She's looking at how social and cultural connections to trees influence lost tree species restoration. Some of you may recognise her because she previously worked for the Woodland Trust's conservation team as citizen science assistant, and she gave a talk for CWA last spring. Before that, she managed a woodland social enterprise called the Whitelands Project CIC. She's now a voluntary director of the CIC and works with local groups to restore the ecosystem of Whiteland woods, encouraging the community to make biodiversity their business through sustainable rural industry. So it's over to you, Fritha.
Thanks very much, Jo. So I'm just going to share my screen there. Oh, sorry. So hopefully everyone can see my PowerPoint. I'm just going to turn my video off to streamline the internet. Okay, so yeah, thanks very much for the intro, Jo. I'm going to start off with the story of how I got involved in woodland management and how it became a community thing. So to start off with, I need to put my hand up and admit that I'm a bit of a nepo baby. So as in, I'm here because of nepotism. I'm in this business because my dad was. He was a forester. He spent years building up a small woodland business called the Whitelands Project. And it was all about restoring the ecosystem of Whitelands wood through sustainable forestry. So that was his aim. This is what he'd been working towards forever. But sadly, in 2018, after I had just graduated university, he died very suddenly in an accident. And we were left with this amazing woodland business and actually no one around to take it on. So I was 22 years old. I had a background in conservation, but definitely not forestry or woodland management. And I can honestly say that, like, I did not know my ass from my elbow. It was a really amazing thing that I wanted to do, but I just didn't know how to get around to it. Yeah, so it was really incredible. So how people in our community and the wider kind of woodland network around us, they came together to look after me and the family and the project. So the wood that I had taken on, so it's actually based in England, so a little bit of a different situation to what you guys are talking about. But the woodland I'd taken on was and is very difficult to manage, but we had this dream to restore it to a thriving woodland ecosystem, and I wanted to carry that on. So in order to do that, I needed all of the help that I could get. Now, woodland management, as all of us will know, has historically been left up to a very small and particular subset of society, with only a handful of people making decisions for huge areas of land. But this is definitely changing. So my dad had complete control over his land and his business, and it was actually a hell of a lot of work for really very little financial return. Seeing all of these amazing species return to the woodland is its own kind of benefit in itself, but it still doesn't kind of hold a person together, and it was often too much for him. So I didn't want that for myself. And apart from anything else, it's actually really bad practice to have one person in charge of everything. It's high risk because if anything happens to them, everything falls apart, as we'd seen firsthand, and I wanted to avoid that happening again. So we needed to diversify. We got lots of different people in to work on very different aspects of the project. We could set up a small sustainable sawmill, kids groups, volunteer work parties, and hosted a few different forestry courses as well. So essentially every problem that we had needing to thin out conifer trees where they were shading others out, needing help with planting or monitoring, was actually a really good opportunity to get other people involved. We really tried to consider all of these kind of initial problems as opportunities. And the idea was to encourage people to see how they could make a livelihood from working in the woods. About a year after my brother and I, about a year after all of this, in 2019, my brother and I incorporated the business as a community interest company. And it's been run as a collaboration between lots of different small businesses since then. Sharing the woodlands is a lot of work. I do a lot of the administrative side, but nowadays more people benefit from it and therefore invest their time and energy in it. So back to kind of the theme of our talk, the benefits for young people and empowering young people to get involved. So setting up as a CIC has given me a lot more time and space to get on with my own life and career. In my professional life, I research the social side of tree health, as Joe has said, and species loss, which is really very, very relevant, but it's actually rarely a cheerful topic. And like a lot of my peers, I really suffer with quite severe eco-anxiety at times. It's really hard to be interested in ecology right now in the natural world when you've got the biodiversity and climate crisis and problems with environmental justice to worry about. It's a hell of a lot to think about, and I try really hard to take the same attitude as I've taken to Whitelands when it comes to stuff like this. Like, yes, these things are awful. Yes, they are problems, but now is an opportunity to engage others and do something about it. So on to young people. Now, there are so many benefits for young people getting involved in woodlands, particularly community woodlands. Getting stuck in and getting my hands dirty is one of the most fulfilling parts of what I do. It really makes a tangible difference. And, you know, whether you're felling trees, planting them, clearing brash, doing surveys, it's a tangible difference, and you can really see what you've done. You feel connected to it, as I think a lot of other people have mentioned. Being in nature and feeling part of it is really one of the best things you can do to fight that sense of grief and anxiety that we all get at times. It's also great, obviously, for developing your skills and your CV and so on. You don't actually have to start as young as Todd here, who you can see as one of our youngest volunteers. But there are so many opportunities to get involved. So as Joe said, I used to work for the Woodland Trust, and I know that they're doing some really amazing things in terms of opportunities to be on a youth council, working as a youth trustee, local woodland working groups. And for those of you interested in ecology, there are many research projects related to woods and trees. You can become a citizen scientist, as we can talk about a bit more later, with things like Nature's Calendar, which helps you track the impact of climate change in your area, the Ancient Tree Inventory, where you can help protect ancient and notable trees, and Observatory, which is a really great one where you can learn to identify tree pests and diseases. That's a problem that's only going to increase. So overall, I'm a big advocate for citizen science. You can do it without committing a huge amount of time or having to travel too far, so it's really nice and flexible. That's really important because a lot of kind of volunteering opportunities, they don't pay. That's the biggest issue with our kind of industry as a whole, I would say. Volunteering is always going to appeal to a fairly limited section of society, people who can afford to give their time for free. But to make woodland communities sustainable, we really need to change the attitude that woodland management should be done simply out of the goodness of our hearts. At Whitelands, we really want people to literally make biodiversity their business. And we believe that people should, in some way, be compensated for the time that they put in, especially when you're young and you're just starting out, because this is when you learn your value. As a CIC, we're hugely grateful for our volunteers, and we do host specific volunteer days, but in general, we try to give back to those who help us as much as we can. Now, no, it's not always possible to pay anyone for their assistance. Funding is obviously a big limitation, but any involvement should really be a two-way street. So we do a lot of sponsoring, mentorship, acting as references, or providing a venue, training and materials for different things that people want to do. So here we provide firewood for local people who help out, material for their own kind of like arts and crafts. It does depend what people need, but they should be able to tell you exactly what they got out of working with you. The most important thing, I think, is to start the conversation and listen to people's answers. When financial arrangements aren't possible, we should at the very least aim for an exchange of knowledge, which I think a lot of people have talked about here, which is brilliant. But whether that's doing a specific species ID course or learning by contributing to a larger scale project, that's where citizen science comes in again. I think everyone involved in the woodland should be able to tell you what they got out of spending the day there. So at Whitelands, we try and take a kind of entrepreneurial mindset and work with a large range of partners, from kids clubs to sawmillers, and we engage across a range of disciplines. Last year, we started a collaboration with a local university that had a school of architecture, and we welcomed 40 second-year undergrads. They came in to help design and make things out of wood, all out of sustainable timber. Crossing disciplines in this way, it really helps everyone see the woodland from a new perspective, and it connects us with people we'd otherwise never have met. Many of these students had rarely left the cities that they grew up in, and they'd never actually considered wood as a renewable resource, and certainly never considered forestry as a viable career. So I think we're all aware of the position that we're in, but currently less than 11% of foresters are under 25. The profession fails to attract young people for a multitude of reasons, from poor pay to challenging work conditions. Forestry is also one of the least diverse sectors in the UK, and in its current form, it is simply not going to stand the test of time. So combine this with the lack of access to green space and widespread nature disconnection that we are experiencing across the country, it's not really surprising that the skills we need to manage our woodlands are being lost. We urgently need more young people to get involved in woodlands, and I think ultimately young people, as we've all been saying, really need woods to get involved in. So land managers can facilitate training, and there are lots of routes into that. So at the moment in England, we've got a forestry training fund. In Scotland, there is the Women in Rural Economy training funds. There's obviously a few more options being developed there. But you can also do things like hosting a citizen science day, hosting ecological courses, introducing people. I've heard everyone here today talking about that kind of thing a lot already. I think making that connection and introducing people is really half the work, and everybody tries to reinvent the wheel. Everybody tries to set up their own thing, but actually partnering with people who have already got an idea of what they're doing is great. So ultimately, the next generation is going to face a lot of different issues. We're going to empower them through knowledge, building contacts, motivation, and talking to them about what they need. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Fritha. I feel like all of our speakers really downplayed to me as the organizer just the wealth of experience and knowledge that they were going to be speaking about today. I am really overwhelmed by how comprehensive that overview has been from all four of you. Thank you so much. So much to think about and continue with, which is very encouraging, because I very much thought of this event as a starting point, and I think it's clear that this is very much only a starting point. But we do have a few questions. We're going to start with a really easy one from Lorna in Neudart. Here's one for you folks. Any thoughts on what community woodland organisations can do to counteract the community politics and bureaucratic nature of running them? Solve that one. Feel free to jump in.
I will jump in with something off the top of my head. For me, the size of the community and the amount of people involved is a big part of this. I mean, community woodlands, for us, our community woodlands being quite enterprise focused, it's really about more than just the connection with nature. That's the focus, but it is about creating jobs and creating places to live. So it really is tying everything in together there. And yeah, so it's supposed to be democratic at any well-functioning charity like ours. And I think when you've got low numbers and there can be one or two or a few people with a strong voice, that can quite often be a real sticking point, and a real hard thing for the organisation to grow past. So I would say numbers is so important, because the more you have, in theory, the more capacity you have, and that's definitely been true for us. One thing we struggled with was a reduced capacity in the group and on the board. And I feel it really got there from from running the group as a committee. That was one big struggle. So every decision in our group was made at these monthly meetings that we met at. So, it could be changing a light bulb in the shed, that was getting talked about at a meeting, as opposed to really meeting as a group and focusing on the bigger issues. And then, so what we did off the back of that was to devolve responsibility. And that's been a real focus at Arkaig Community Forest. And I was saying earlier to folk, we've got 10 board members now, and each has a lot of autonomy in specific things. So each board member has a different responsibility. So we've got 3 land areas, for example, and each land area has a board member for it, and they're responsible for that. They have oversight. And same for our assets, for our businesses, it's the same. So yes, not having one person holding all the cards, or a few people, that's been really important. So yeah, devolving responsibility, that's my answer.
Yeah, I remember hearing that you'd done that from over the Glen, in the next Glen over in Glengarry. And I always thought that was a really good way to tackle that issue, giving kind of individual board members specific responsibilities, because it also addresses that issue of capacity as well, and allows the board as a whole to focus on the sort of bigger picture strategic thinking when they do come together.
Yeah. I think it encourages people to engage more. So if it's a committee type environment, I just feel like there's only so much people can take of that before it sort of burns out, where it just seems like meetings go on forever and the talk's really small and not very inspiring. So I feel like giving responsibility to people, it's inspiring for them. Yeah.
Do any of our other speakers have thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I think in many ways you're never going to be able to remove some of the struggles with that side of it all, like the whole politics side, because being a community woodland, in many ways it belongs to the community, and people are always going to have very different ideas as to what they would want out of it, depending what they value in life. And some things, like it's about finding a balance between it all, because even like the whole sort of community engagement and increasing infrastructure, you need to balance that off with the sort of biodiversity and conservation side. So people want these, some people that will want these events and want some of these activities that are slightly more destructive. Even I get things like paintballing and zip lines mentioned to me every so often. I have to no, we can't do that, because there's so many reasons we can't do that. But at the same time, these people are completely justified to ask for these things, because it is their community woodland. And in theory, if enough of them wanted these things, we'd have to respect that. But I think you're never gonna truly eliminate that side of it. And I think I can't think of a way in which you could. And also, rural communities, you've always got external politics spilling over into it. It's not really about the woodlands. It's about neighbours and people like that. And so I think what's just important, and like what I was going to mention at the end of my talk, I think as Joe's set all this up for, I think it's having these support networks that you can chat about these things and see how, do you know what, literally every community forest is facing these same problems, and you're not the only one having to deal with these difficult these difficult situations, that it's actually very comparable to other ones. And even just knowing that, you feel a lot more comfortable tackling them as well, because it's not an alien situation. You're not alone with it. It's just part of the job, really.
Yeah. On that note, before I come to Fritha, that prompts me well to mention the Community Learning Exchange, which is funded by the Scottish Community Alliance, and CWA is a partner in that. And so you can apply to go and visit another woodland and learn from them, as well as a sort of Google group that CWA facilitates as well. So there are different ways in which CWA currently tries to facilitate those sorts of connections, because we constantly get feedback that is one of the most valuable services that we offer. Coming to you, Fritha.
Thanks. Yeah, I completely agree with everything that the others have said there. I think that, conflict is just going to be a part of it. That's part of kind of collaboration, but seeing conflict as a kind of a way to create necessary change, I think is really important, even if you're just changing someone's perspective, like seeing it as a kind of positive thing that people are voicing their opinions. It's really hard to keep that perspective. I know when people are kind of nagging at you. I've definitely been in the situation where people really feel that their opinions are far more important than mine, especially when I first started, but still making them feel valued and listened to, I think is just really key. Yeah.
That's what I would add. Quite often if somebody's got a really strong opinion on something, sometimes it's nothing to do with the subject, it's more to do with them feeling like they're not being heard or they're not valued. So quite often they talk the loudest or put the most roadblocks in. So it's not every situation, but sometimes it's worth finding out what the real issue is. Spend some time talking to potentially the individual or the few individual people who are creating barriers to progress, which is quite often the case. Sometimes it's nothing to do with what you're talking about. Sometimes it's something completely different, and it's worth taking a step back, not getting emotionally involved, taking a step back and looking at it like that. And if you can spend some time with that individual and see if there is something else going on, it can quite often resolve the problem.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear all of your perspectives on that. I think especially from the perspective of an underrepresented group, like we're talking about imposter syndrome, we're talking about already kind of being in spaces that perhaps people are kind of, Samuel mentioned, may not be kind of seeing you as an equal or as an adult, as Samuel put it. For me, that just kind of underscores the importance of really strong governance. And sometimes that's something that, you know, people feel is a bit boring, or they, you know, we run events about governance, and people might not think it's the sexiest topic in the world, but it just kind of underscores that it really strong governance processes and practices are just so important. So we've got a few more comments and questions. I am keen to wrap up by kind of 10 past, so we're not going to get through everything. But I will just say that a few folk have commented just to say thank you so much to all the speakers, and to say how inspired and encouraged I feel by the event, and that's just fantastic. That was absolutely the intention. Just to remind folk that we do have a Facebook group for younger folk as well. If you do want to join that, you're very welcome to. That was sort of, I set that up after the conference, and it's very much member led. So it's not something that CWA is sort of posting in all the time or trying to direct. So it's very much your space. So please do use it. I posted in the chat as well a link to the citizen science event that Fritha gave for us last year. And I think there's just, I'm just keen to come to Megan's question at the end, and we'll make that the final question. So Megan has joined us from Skye, and she said she's wondering how we can create better networks of young folk in community woodlands. Maybe it's too big of a question, but one for further thought. I feel like Megan's doing our job for us a little bit there with CWA, because that's absolutely one of the questions that we want to ask. So do you have any suggestions for how we can create better networks of younger people?
Within my organisation, I try, especially post-COVID, because COVID kind of squashed all the socialising and almost the community feel, kind of crippled it a little bit. Since then, I've been trying to have, not successfully, but we're trying to have monthly community lunches where it's just about coming together and having a chat. There's nothing to be achieved, there's no outcome. And that's good for kind of people on the ground, younger people, building in a social element. But I think we could do that in this network as well. I mean, this was born from us meeting at the Community Woodlands Association. So go along, network, go to conferences, go to as many opportunities as you can to talk to other people who are doing what you're doing.
I completely agree with that. I think in-person events are just so important. I think Joe's managed to meet each of us in person at different events, and just engaging, being ready to talk to people, it just does so much. And making the events like really fun and enjoyable, that's what young people kind of go for. If it looks like it'll make a cool Instagram story, I reckon they're going to be there. So yeah.
Yeah, just to add to that, I completely agree. And it's making, like as Amy said, this all mentioned because like 4 of us met at the conference and we very quickly became friends. I think that's a big part of it, is it's not just about the professional relationships, it's about, realistically, I feel quite confident to say most of us here are probably quite like-minded. We've got similar like hobbies and interests and passions. High probability most of us will get on well at these like events, and it's about making these friendships that you can carry on. And I mean, like, some of us chat really regularly about forest stuff, about random life stuff, and I think that's the best way, I think, to build this network, is with friendship, as cheesy as that sounds. That was painful saying that, I'm sorry.
Good.
Sorry,
Do you have something to say, Fritha? I feel like you're stepping in to rescue Samuel.
No, it's all good. Actually, building on what Samuel said there, I think, although it's really true that like we all have similar interests, you shouldn't be concerned about reaching out across like a divide across a different discipline. Like I said before, having some people from like an urban university come in, they'd never really spent time in the woods, but yeah, coming at it with like a really friendly attitude and being really happy to introduce people on a personal level, I think is really important.
That sets me up perfectly for the sort of closing words and wrapping up, because I think one of the biggest takeaways from this event is that young people are not a homogenous group, and there's not just one solution, and so it's just really important to hear a lot of different perspectives, and explore different experiences even within the, you know, the 4 speakers that we've had today. There have been so many different contexts, different routes into the movement, and so many kind of opportunities and potential barriers that people have brought up. So very much a first step. I would like to thank all of our speakers again. Thank you so much. Fantastic range of sort of topics that you've raised, and we have recorded this session, so it will be going on YouTube, and hopefully a few more folk will also watch it there. And I'd just like to invite everyone to get in touch. You know, we have our staff contact details on the CWA website. You can get in touch on social media, join the Facebook group, and we're always happy to hear from you if you have any ideas and if there's anything else that CWA can support you with. I'm not sure if Andy maybe wanted to come in and say a final few words.
Mixed feelings on that, Joe, because I'm not a young person and this is a young person's event. However, the one thing I really do want to say is thank you to you for organising it, putting it together and making it all work and running it so well. So I've been listening, I've been taking notes. So you'll have seen in the chat, we have been kicking around ideas about how we can have safe spaces for staff of community woodland groups and board members of community woodland groups to drop in and have chats. And maybe we need to add a safe space for young people to drop in on a quarterly basis and just have that non-outcome, non-focused space to shoot the breeze around community woodlands. And I think we can probably make that happen.
Yeah.
So that's all I want to say. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you very much, Andy. Thanks for doing tech support in the background. Hopefully nothing came up while I was chairing. Yeah. It all seemed pretty calm.
Asking the old man to do the tech joke.
So just to thank everyone finally for coming, and please do stay in touch. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.